This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to the Bay Area again with our favorite quantum physicist, Aaron Breidenbach. Aaron, as you're going to hear, has just returned from an adventure in Chile that he alluded to in our last podcast. It's an adventure near and dear to this podcast's theme of bringing things together that aren't normally thought of as going together. And in this case, it's quantum physics and animism, and specifically the animism of the Andes, a practice called Ani. And here's where I think we end up. Aaron's research interests in quantum crystals focuses on these unique crystals known for their unique abilities to connect with, process, and receive vast amounts of information. The same sort of traits that perhaps can be cultivated through these animistic practices associated with Ani. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here, and here's Aaron to guide us through his wonderful journey. Well, wild man, it looks like you've been on some adventures since we last talked, huh?
I sure have.
Oh, well, I think we're going to continue the adventures here. Okay, speaking of adventures, so just tell me if so here's where I'm thinking I would like to end up.
Yeah.
So, this podcast likes to bring things together that don't normally fit together, but, so I'm trying to bring out principles in quantum physics, like maybe the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, along with Incan animistic principles like Ani or reverence.
Or even like the kind of parallels between Ani and quantum entanglement, right? Just like the inherent interrelationship between things that at a glance might seem distant.
Right, as still being interrelated.
Right.
And the fact that we can't know things, I think, also leads to a different sort of relationship than trying to control things like through strip mining, things like that. But let's sort of a tangent. Let's start off.
Yeah.
What I thought was an interesting place to start would be your old friend Herbertsmithite, which sort of started this, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So as I understand it, that is a crystal that was a focus of your research at Stanford, or one of the crystals, and it shows great promise for quantum computing because of its properties. And what you've discovered, I think, in actually investigating natural sources of Herbertsmithite in Chile is that when this crystal is found in nature, it has, and better is probably not the right word, but properties more conducive to expanding quantum computing than lab-made crystals.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. And I would say better is actually an appropriate word here, at least in some ways. The natural crystals are smaller than my lab synthetics, but they are higher purity. They're closer to the stoichiometric, ideal stoichiometric ratio than some of my synthetic crystals. And I wrote a whole article on the physics of what this could do, but I've proposed some measurements, and I have some colleagues and collaborators that are interested to start measuring this with me too. So I'm very excited about the research directions the natural crystals might open for us.
Yeah. So and I thought that would be interesting to sort of expand that principle that, by and large, nature and relationship with nature that's sort of pure and unadulterated by human interaction has more expansive properties in general than lab made. And the example, I was thinking about forest management. I mean, if nature was managing a forest, the forest would be thriving. and humans going in with all their plans and manipulations and PhDs, perhaps of studying things, and look what's happening around the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. So, the first thing on my mind here is that I think being a physicist my whole life, mixing chemicals in lab, I was just astounded by the scale of chemical reactions that goes on in the Earth's crust, because Chile is the most seismically active country in the world. So, there's tons of earthquakes, there's tons of copper, so there's tons of just chemical reactions that just occur naturally that are driven by Gaia, if you will. And, at first, I think my colleagues, especially at Stanford, maybe less so for people that I've talked to at Berkeley, they were really surprised to hear that natural crystals were more pure than their lab counterparts. But I think one of the main reasons where at least some of the natural crystals are more pure than our synthetics is because natural crystals, I think, grow from at least 10 different reaction pathways. So when you kind of put it from that perspective, that like nature is mixing millions of tons of chemicals in many different ways all the time, it makes sense that some would come out more pure relative to our highly controlled lab environment, where we can only kind of do this a petri dish at a time. We just can't compete with the scale of our host planet, really.
Yeah. So how has that manifested itself in what you found in Chile in sort of your investigations of the natural crystals there?
Yeah, so I was astounded and really happy to find my natural crystals. That was amazing. The thing that made me sad, I suppose, is that they're probably being dissolved en masse in sulfuric acid, basically as a low-grade copper ore, which is really ironic and sad to me because in a lab it takes me like a week and a half of hard work, 50 hours to set up a growth and 9 months of waiting. Meanwhile, we have pure crystals just sitting around in nature that are currently just being used as low grade copper ore because no one in Chile really knew that it had novel quantum properties.
Yeah. So why to a layperson do the properties of crystals like Herbertsmithite uh, engender themselves to quantum computing? What is about their properties sort of in any way you could describe it, maybe not mathematically, that would allow them to be used in quantum computing? Or what is about quantum computing that uses the properties of these natural crystals?
Yeah, so a couple of questions in there. And so the first is these crystals are predicted to be a new state of matter entirely, and that's called a quantum spin liquid. And I think many laymen probably have even heard the term quantum entanglement. It's where things that maybe even are spatially separated store information between each other, and the information, rather than being with the specific atoms, the information is stored between atoms and how they relate to each other. And so, in very broad strokes, this allows these crystals to store more information than a traditional computer, where the information is more or less stored in bits, like the direction of a defined ferromagnet and iron on your disk drive, for instance, where the information is just in the atoms itself. Here in these crystals, the information would hypothetically be stored in between the atoms in the interconnected witness. And since there's so many different ways for atoms to interconnect, it can in principle store more information, since the information's in the betweenness rather than in the individual, the interconnection rather than the singular.
Yeah. And so what was interesting that I found is obviously the ancient Incans were not using these crystals for quantum computing, but they had ceremonial value. So they recognized them as somewhat sacred.
They did, and that's something that I want to continue archaeological investigation of. One of the things I found that blew my mind the most being in Chile is there's altars all over the place. These people are very animistic, and many incorporated local crystals, because in the Atacama, that's one thing that stood out to me. There's crystals everywhere just on the Earth's surface due to the seismic activity and dryness of the place. But I found one altar that probably contains at least atacamite, a hexagonal crystal that was built into a hexagonal altar that was made in devotion to a local mountain. So I was it made me really wonder if maybe, I'm not sure how old this altar was, but they maybe had techniques even to see by eye or with basic magnification. They might have been able to see that these crystals were hexagonal or nothing else, or it made me really scratch my head when I saw that altar. But I guess this is going a place that's even more exciting than that.
Well, let's go there.
Yeah.
Take me there. We could stop about Miss Barone, or how do you want to talk about this? How do you want to set this up?
Yeah, so I guess in addition to the altars and just the ceremonial value of finding pretty crystals and making pretty things out of it, a lot of these crystals have also been found at the summit of sacred mountains. And certainly there's a system of Ani among the indigenous people of northern Chile. They're very animistic, reciprocal with their land. And these ores are frequently found at the sacred mountain peaks as offerings. And, I'm sure for listeners of this podcast, that's nothing new. You might offer coca to a mountain or other things like that as well, natural things, plants. But the mountains are very much viewed as conscious and a part of their ecosystems, and it's very normal to give it something before you ask for something from it or take something from it. So there's certainly strong archaeological evidence I found of Atacamite, a very close sister material of Herbertsmithite, being found at sacred mountains tops. And I certainly want to go back to investigate to see if any Herbertsmithite has been found at mountaintops as well, or if there's any archaeological evidence that they thought, if they thought anything of it in particular.
Yeah, can you maybe unpack a little bit more about Ani and the reciprocal relationship and what you understand that to be?
Yeah, and so as a Westerner, the first thing I'll say is I will not pretend to understand this nearly as well as a South American that lives this every day. But from what my collaborators in Chilean anthropology, especially Vincente Carrasola Vega, has told me, is that it's their basic economic system, and it was the economic system primarily employed by the Inca, and many famous archaeologists and anthropologists who study how the system was used and continues to be used among indigenous populations today, they argue it's non-equivalent to capitalism because the living earth is considered to be a part of the reciprocal system. So rather than exchanging goods and services for monetary value, the system is more about balance. And you might say one region, like the Atacama, might want something like water for some resource, and the exchange is not viewed as just between human beings, but between human beings, land and other land. So when you kind of really immerse yourself in the animistic world, Ani at its core, and I wish I understood this better, but it seems to be an economic system that's not just between humans, but between humans and nature and nature and nature. And I think that's what makes understanding these systems really special today, especially as us Westerners, try and grapple with things like climate change and ecological damage.
Yeah. Do you get a sense that Ani is almost like trying to foster a relationship or connection with different aspects of nature and recognizing the spirits in them?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And definitely the individual ceremonies, even something as small as a coca offering to ask a mountain for permission before extracting, I think really grounds ourselves in, making sure you're connected to your immediate environment. And I'm certain that those practices and understanding the spirits of the land are in part why a lot of these traditions have fostered more like seventh generation sustainable practices as compared to what we do as Westerners who don't operate within Ani do today.
Yeah. And again, I'm trying to explore this and whether Ani and sort of this sort of relationship has any resonances with quantum physics, and especially, we talked about quantum entanglement, or just, there just seems to be something about quantum physics, even if it's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where there's a sense of humility that and lack of control and sort of a, I don't know. I mean, this is like way above my pay grade, but I'm trying to see if there's any resonance is here.
Yeah, and so I need to be careful with what I say here because I think some physicists will get a bit mad at me.
Oh, okay, but we won't tell them. Just like
Oh, they may not. I don't know if they listen to your show anyways.
probably not.
Maybe more of them should, but at least metaphorically, I think Ani is highly related to quantum physics because maybe less so the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in this case, but I think in terms of entanglement, right? Because Ani directly acknowledges the interrelationship between how practices or extractivist practices at one place on Earth will inevitably end up affecting things on other place of the Earth. And the whole goal is to find balance such that each environment is resonant and everything is where it needs to be and belongs within these environments such that everything's resonating. And at least qualitatively, that's kind of how we think about maybe your quantum crystals too. Like I said, my quantum crystals, especially if they eventually get turned into quantum computing memory, are going to be defined by the properties of their internal interrelatedness rather than just their state of being. So, in that sense, I feel like Ani is kind of at least a parallel to quantum mechanics in terms of how it recognizes the fundamental interrelatedness, or dare I say, entanglement of all living things on Earth.
Yeah. So this is something this morning that I was thinking about, and if I'm on the wrong trail, just let me know. I am I am sort of fixated on this idea that Ani, and I don't understand it either, or any of these animistic principles. But anyway, a connection that is sort of more pure to nature, like with I mentioned, like the analogy of forestry, like the connection that's sort of less adulterated, less human interaction, more natural, has sort of a deeper connection. And I was thinking, like, at least if we're talking mysticism, a connection with sort of a spiritual aspect that is like channeled, like just received without it, sort of not sort of processed by the mind in a way that that is filtered out, but a direct experience would be closer to what we're talking about here than a process that goes through human machinations later on and is adulterated. And I don't know if adulterated is the right word, but just that humans can have a direct connection with nature, I think, or a more direct than what we have, because we're sort of our connection is sort of so filtered through any number of things now, media, cell phones, television, communication, that there's something that about the purity of the connection that I'm sort of intrigued about, and especially relating that to sort of the fact that the natural crystals are pure too.
Yeah, and I think that this is truly the reason why, as a Westerner, I can't claim to fully understand Ani, just because the world they live in is almost a different universe than me. Because I do think that mysticism and embodied states of consciousness are a far more common and accepted part of their culture than it is here in the West. And so, certainly, as part of Ani, I believe, and I need to, do a lot more anthropological research into this, but it might be more normal for a shaman or a community leader to say, hey, I was meditating, I, did plant medicine, I spoke with the spirit of the mountain, he is concerned about this, we need to reciprocate, or he asks for this. And I think there is a more direct understanding or acceptance within their culture of the realness and directness of these nature spirits. So I think to really understand Ani, I'd have to immerse myself with these culture. And I've seen tidbits of it just being in Chile for a month with how Ani and offerings are done in practice. But like, I truly don't understand, because just the way I think these people are raised to construe the environment around them and their interconnectedness with it is just so different than us. It's really hard to at times understand why they're doing things, but I do think that the net result is almost undebatable, that it results in larger ecological harmony with their environment. And I do think we could stand to learn a lot from them with that, if nothing else.
Or their offering as a way of giving up what the people in the West would call the self, the ego, and sort of that it's a more pure connection because it's more intimate. I mean, there is no separation. If you're making an offering, you're giving something of yourself to that. I don't know. We should go back to your Chilean adventure. I think we went on a less sidetrack. So tell
Yes.
me about sort of your anthropological connections there and how that all came to be.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of embodied interactions, maybe the next place to go is I met with Ana Maria Barón, and she is one of the most famous archaeologists in Chile, and she got to tell me one of her favorite stories of a direct interaction with the mountain.
Sure, let's hear about that crystal ball.
Yes, yes. So I'll start. I think that this audience especially would be interested to hear more about Anna Baron, and I was just honored to meet her because she is one of Chile's most famous archaeologists in general. We could do a whole show on her career accomplishments, but among many other things, one of her most famous discoveries was the largest archaeological discovery of gold from the Tiwanaku pre-Incan Empire, same region. So she discovered a ton of Tiwanaku gold. So she was already famous in Chilean archaeology before this discovery happened. Um, but in any case, all the gold in Chile was not her favorite archaeology discovery. She made one of the most interesting archaeology discoveries I've ever heard of, where she was studying sacred mountains after this period in her archaeological career. She hiked to the top of Licancabur, which is one of the most sacred mountains or volcanoes in all of Andinian mythology. And she was with the diver Henry Garcia, and he pulled out a crystal ball from the alpine crater lake that sits at the summit of Licancabur. And the way she tells the story is that when Henry pulled out the crystal ball, it started glowing so hot that it burnt through his diving suit, and he dropped the ball back into the lake. And during this chaotic process, one of the light beams from the crystal ball hit Anna in the eyes. From the perspective of her colleagues, this caused her to faint. But from her own perspective, she had a direct encounter and ended up speaking with the altitude of heights god, or Licancabur, the volcano itself. Basically, she asked him in this kind of mystical experience for the volcano to give her some of his strength, and he consented. And then she said she was a lifelong smoking addict prior to this encounter with Licancabur, and afterwards she got a hold of her smoking addiction, and she said she felt a lot better afterwards. So that's why this was her most favorite archaeological discovery, even more so than all the gold, because of the personal and profound and powerful impact it had on her life.
Yeah, yeah, and that is pure. I mean, that is something that is unexpected, breaking through the veil. In Western terms, we've got people like Leonard Cohen said that's the crack that lets the light in. Literally,
Yes,
and
literally in this case, yeah.
and so it's like the whole practice is, you know, if you give away things, then there's more of a crack because there's less you. I mean, it's a more pure. I don't know. I'll stop with that.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing too, because it at least gives us a window into understanding, because there's very extensive archaeological sites on the side of Licancabur too that have been hypothesized to house pilgrims. So I think from Anna's perspective, she also said that having this experience gave her some more insight and as to why these structures existed, because it's at least easy to imagine that in the thin atmosphere and the bright Atacama sun, that a lot of other ancient people were having similar kinds of mystical experiences at the summit of this volcano as well, and that they might have even gained some healing from it like she did.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially that if you wanted to connect with spirits of the volcano, you would want to get up to the source, perhaps. It would be
That's right.
just
Yeah.
striking a friendship and then making offerings.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, I think it really helps us in those extreme environments to connect to the power of the natural world itself. And so I'm planning to go on a return expedition to find this crystal ball as well, because I have some ideas of how it could be used for physics or relate to my crystals.
Oh, what are those?
So the interesting thing about the crystal ball story is, since I'm a physicist, I think that her story makes sense from even just a materialistic and physics perspective, because Lee Kankeber holds the world record as well for the highest ever UV index recorded on planet Earth, because it's in the world's driest desert. It sits nearly directly at the Tropic of Capricorn, and it's at 19,000 feet. So on the summer solstice, or near to it, NASA scientists measured a UV index of 43.3, which for context is like higher than the average value on the surface of Mars, which is quite insane. Like, under these conditions, your skin will burn and turn purple if exposed in like 1 minute because of how much radiation there is. But as a physicist, from this perspective, it's not so surprising what happened with the crystal ball when it was pulled from the lake, because at least from the first few calculations I did with that kind of UV index at the summit, it would make sense that a glass optic or crystal ball would focus enough sunlight to kind of heat up that quickly, and that it would, it could burn through the diving suit and hurt this man's hand. So my first idea was to use this crystal ball to focus it onto the crystals, because my crystals are actually very UV responsive, so they might do something special at the summit.
Yeah. And so you think that the UV might what you mentioned, they might do something special. What are you hypothesizing there?
I think they might crack, because specifically Herbertsmithite has a peak in UV absorption, which means, so basically all of the solar power that gets channeled through this crystal ball, if you could focus it onto a single small crystal, it would be absorbing so much energy that it couldn't structurally handle it, and it might crack. And so and this is something that happens commonly at modern day beamlines as well. If you have a crystal that you shoot X-rays at it or some other optical radiation and absorbs too much energy too quickly, it can crack. So I'd certainly need to test this in practice rather than just trying to guesstimate how much sun this crystal ball actually can focus. But to me, it's not surprising. I mean, especially because we already have a direct evidence that it burned through a diving suit. So in any case, I'm excited to see what happens, because I think that visually, optically, or even physically, if the crystals crack, it could be spectacular. And then I'd obviously love to, take an indigenous elder or shaman to the summit with me to see if they have an animistic story about what's going on from their perspective as well. But I think it might be something special.
Yeah. So so that's the we just talked about Leonard Cohen's quote about the crack that lets the light in, and then that's you would have um, consciousness being analogous to a crystal in a way that you would crack something within consciousness similar to a crystal. I mean, crystal, I guess if we wanted to reduce things, the brain obviously is different than a crystal, but yet there's still matter there that I don't know. Help me, Aaron. Help me with this analogy.
That is a really interesting one, and it's something that I want to understand better the indigenous perspective on it, because I think there is at least some thought within many of these indigenous South American cultures that crystals hold some kind of special spirit or mystical value. And certainly, that's one of the other things I think of from a modern perspective, is if these crystals will be conscious, if they end up, hosting quantum computing memory someday, especially if they run, you know, future AI that holds even more memory coherently than modern AI. But I really don't know what kind of analogies they might make between the crystals and the human mind in these animistic cosmologies, because it's still so foreign to me, just given the culture was raised in. But um, definitely, I think they would say something interesting about the crystal's experience if it ends up getting cracked interacting with their sun god, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to see. Well, what was Ms. Barone like as a person, or how
She she was the most fabulous, generous, and enthusiastic person I have ever met. She's an very eccentric lady for one. She lives in Hotel Tulor, which is a recreation of one of her famous archaeological discoveries, Tulor ruins. So she greeted us, she talked to us for 2 or 3 hours. She was very generous. She showed off her giant collection of prehistoric tools, rocks, meteorites, and all the different books she published over her storied career. So she's about 80 years old at this point, but having talked to her for so long at her home, it would have hardly known it.
Yeah. So what about your trajectory? What where do you see yourself heading, or what would your research interests be, or lack of research interests?
Yeah, there's so many more exciting things to do with this project. Like I said, I proposed some new experiments that might be possible with natural crystals due to their higher purity. So I applied for beam time at two of our national labs to try and see some signatures of the higher crystal's natural purity. You can read about this on my blog as well. But I hope I get time for these experiments. That would be one exciting thing to measure from a physicist standpoint. But then, of course, I do hope to get deeper into the archaeology and anthropology. Funding might be hard. Unfortunately, I was recently denied National Geographic grant for this, but I do really, really want to interact more with Indigenous elders to get their perspectives on it, especially with regards to why these crystals are found at the summit of mountains, and if they think they would actually have used an energetic device like Barone's crystal ball to measure it, just because I still struggle to understand Ani, but it's really hard for me to sit on the sidelines and see my quantum crystals sitting at the summit of, sacred volcanoes, sacred mountains, and really not know fully why. So no matter what, I will be making a return expedition at some point. Even if I have to fund it myself, but it will be exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you being called by the crystals to investigate, or is there something, or or how would you characterize it? You
Yeah.
can you can speak like a physicist. You don't have to listen to my woo woo stuff. But
Oh
is there
no,
there's
this
something
is
calling you? Yeah.
entirely woo woo. I mean, I'm a lucid dreamer as well. I know you did a recent episode on this, and just 2 or 3 nights ago, I had a lucid dream in which Anna's crystal ball was literally calling me
Yeah.
back to Chile. And it's obviously I spend so much time obsessing and researching over this, where it makes sense. But it was so interesting having that thing as either a part of my consciousness or independent entity, but I was interacting with it, and it seems to, at least in my mental projection of it, want me to come back and measure it, because I don't know, perhaps the knowledge around it was lost, and it's it is, the mysticism is something that drives me, and trying to connect to the natural world is inevitably what led me to go on this expedition in the first place.
So since you mentioned a lucid dream about crystals and sort of a calling, that's something I kind of is a part of my experience as well. I sort of notice that, like, I'll get really intense sort of connections with things in the middle of the night, and then and upon waking, they begin to sort of fade, and then by the middle of the day, it's like, oh, that'll never work. I mean, then sort of a different sort of reality comes in, and that's kind of analogous to what I was talking about at the beginning about um, that sort of I wonder if there's a sort of a purity about the night and the dreams and the connections that then becomes more adulterated during the day with human conceptions. And there is something magical or special about sort of these these nighttime lucid dreams or hypnagogic states, or whatever you would want to call them, that um, well, I'd just be curious about your thoughts on that, because it's something that I'm trying to wonder if I should not sort of poo-poo them as much, and really sort of investigate them and lead them, as opposed to letting them dissolve during the day, perhaps. I mean, obviously, it doesn't sound like you're letting them dissolve if you're going to go back and look for the crystal ball. So, I mean,
No, and yeah, I think at a minimum, I will say, like, keeping a dream journal has changed my life because, it helps me remember my dreams. And then even the dreams that are really strange and out there, I think have really strong emotional patterns, and they help you learn something about yourself or patterns in your environment. And then the more you dream and try and make sense of your dreams and how it might relate to your waking life, I originally went in with the psychological view because I'm a Western physicist, but the more and more I do this, now and then I'll have a dream where I'm like, wow, I have no idea how this information actually came to me or what happened here. But, it ends up being useful to, I think, process information about the environment, understand our place in the world. And yeah, I think there really is something special about the nighttime state, since I think, we're going inward rather than having to deal with all the messiness of the outward connections, and so many interesting things can happen. And I'm still really a novice to this space as well. I know many people have gone much deeper into this than me as well.
do you think that the what you're going to discover through a deeper investigation of animism is going to lead to potential breakthroughs in quantum computing in some way? I mean, is that sort of in your mind? Have you had any vision of that?
I mean, yeah, and it's, at this point, I think the main connection I made scientifically is obviously the higher purity of the natural crystals, but that's something I hope to talk with more physicists about as well, because I at least feel, given my own experience, if more physicists were connected to dreams and altered states of consciousness, that it might, help them better understand their materials as well. And I think I certainly internalized better a lot of the properties of my quantum crystals and the quantum spin liquid state itself, especially in this case through meditative visions with DMT. And so I, I not sure with the crystal ball and that whole archaeological expedition in a literal sense, but just even changing your frame of mind enough to wrap your head around mysticism and Ani, I think can really change your perspective enough to let other insights come in too, even from the Western physicist perspective. But it's the two-eyed seeing, as they say, is a really difficult thing for me to juggle. But I think I'll continue to benefit from it.
Yeah. And it's like the greater insights you have aren't even ours. I mean, they're coming from who knows. I mean, I'm not saying they're coming from elsewhere, because we're all we're all linked, but it's like this Western idea that, oh, these are my thoughts and da 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 da. I mean, it's just like, no, just give them up. Make that offering. Give up those thoughts to the mountain.
Yes, every thought we've ever had at some point was precipitated by some interaction we had with another human or our environment. Then even before our birth, we have evolved to have certain structures in our brain that were responses to our environment, right? So always we're just an antenna of some sort to absorb spirit in some sense.
I think I don't know. I think you're going to have to figure that one out. I don't know
Uh,
about the antenna stuff either. I
it's
think I think that's yeah, it's interesting. I think one day you're going to be doing something, and one of the crystals are going to shine a light on you, the world will open up on you.
We'll see. Obviously that's the experiment idea. Is if Anna Barron had a mystical experience just from the light from the crystal ball directly hitting her in the eyes. I now imagine sunlight, crystal ball, quantum crystal, Aaron's eyes. I have
Yeah.
no idea what's going to happen in that experiment.
Yeah.
I can only imagine it will be something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else is on your adventure list on coming up?
Yeah, in terms of talking to, so the local shaman in the area are called a yatiri, and there's interesting story about how yatiri are getting selected too. So I want to go into the field and see if this is still true. But from mythology books I read mostly at the Museum of Pre-Columbian Art in Santiago, it's been said that yatiri in the Aymara and Atacamanian tradition are chosen by the sky gods because they strike them by lightning.
Mm. So yeah, that would make sense. Not that would make sense, but it just would. Um, so the other thing. So is there? But before I go off on another tangent, is there anything you'd like to discuss about your Medium article or anything that we've missed along the way that you would like to do?
I definitely love you going on a tangent, Michael Kokol. Always interesting. Uh,
Okay.
as for the articles, I think we hit most of the major points. I guess the sadder point that maybe bears a bit more evidence is I love talking about all the positive aspects of Ani and the potential of doing these experiences and reconnecting to indigenous thought. But I think the sadder part is of how much of this has already been lost because the ecological damage in the Atacama Desert is quite severe. The local flow in the river has decreased 75% over the last 100 years due to overextraction for mining. Agricultural output in the indigenous community I spoke with in San Francisco de Chuchu has decreased by a factor of 5, in part because of toxic dust kind of blowing off these waste piles. So I guess one of the sadder things I found is that the Atacamanians, particularly the one indigenous group of the desert, has lost most of their animistic traditions and reciprocity. They mostly work in the mines, and I think they're sad because I did talk to leaders and they say, yeah, things were better back in the farming day, but what are we to do? Because we have to make a living. So I definitely want to push further into the foothills that haven't been impacted by mining to talk with the Aymara, who hold still probably these incredibly interesting and fascinating animistic traditions. But my heart does particularly go out to the Atacamanians who lost so much of the natural beauty of their land and have to live in this highly industrialized, toxic environment. And that part of this made me sad quite a bit.
Yeah, it's tragic, and it's almost like they were living in to go back to sort of my earlier themes, that they were living in a pure connection, an unadulterated connection that is sometimes we can only experience maybe in the middle of the night in our deepest sort of brain states, and they've now had to wake up to the day of at least this phase of humans where everything is polluted by not just the environment and the copper, but there's so much debris coming from humans right now. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's just sad because they had this connection, this intimacy with, and I'm obviously I can only imagine this because it's so far removed, but maybe not. I mean, maybe like in our dreams, less adulterated, we sort of can connect with that. I mean, I don't know.
I think that's a beautiful note because the one thing I'll say with respect to the Atacamanians in particular that gives me hope is that there's a very strong push from their communities and the Chilean government to regain their cultural heritage. So
Yeah.
a lot of this comes down to the maintenance of archaeological sites. But, one of my chief collaborators, like I mentioned last time, Elizabeth Avia, is going through strong efforts to revitalize the officially extinct language of her people in Kunza. And one magical and mystical thing about the Atacama Desert in general, being the world's driest desert, is even when animism isn't practiced directly in the communities anymore, nothing ever disappears very quickly in the Atacama. The ruins, the archaeological sites are everywhere. And in that sense, I think that will be a great aid to the Atacamanians as they go about revitalizing their culture, because there's always unadulterated places left in the desert that they can go to remember what things were like before the mines came to town. And those sites just still felt very powerful and special to me, seeing all of the archaeological sites in the desert. It's somewhat easier, I think, to imagine the way things used to be.
Have you researched at all their? I mean, maybe we should talk a little bit about their animistic practices, at least that you've found about that allows them sort of this pure connection. If you've been able to get your finger on or sort of intuitively just had glimpses of it, perhaps.
Some intuitive glimpses, like I said, the Atacamanians lost this more so, but there's definitely Aymarans living in the region of Antofagasta a bit, and I've definitely seen the offerings, the reciprocities, and I do have some understanding, but like I said, I think I will just have to go deeper into Chilean Andes or even Bolivia, um, where this is preserved more. But I think that the more connected you are with nature, the more pure things are, the more waking life might seem like dream life, the more we're able to connect our dreams to waking life, and the more we're able to talk with nature and respect it as a living being. When you're kind of in that direct environment of nature relationship in particular, much harder to maintain these systems when you're in a place that's set up to be so industrial, like the most of the regions I was in Chile.
Yeah. So the sense of let's probe a little bit about the idea of quantum computing and being able to hold more information at a distance. Um, that's so okay. Here's the tangent. Um, have you heard of human design at all?
A little bit. You'll
Yeah,
get to walk me through this.
I'm not into it. I'm not into it. But a friend sort of really is researching it, and so at one level, it kind of touches on the theme of their designer or the person that allegedly came up with this. It's a channeled text. Supposedly it's not a text. It's just a channeled thing.
Yeah,
And then later on, he had some issues. He modified it a little bit, and it's kind of was a grifter in a way, allegedly grifter. I'm not going to. I don't know. None of this is personal information, but I'm just it's my understanding that there were some fraud allegations and stuff like that. But that's not important. But that kind of is going along with my theory about natural sort of channeled things being pure, and then humans kind of adulterating them later on. But sort of one of the things they did, and I had a reading, and they said that I don't have whatever the spleen channel is. It's like I have no intuition, which is like I have no like inner voice, no, which I'm overstating it, but and exaggerating. But at one level that's probably true, that I don't have sort of this gut feeling a lot, that it's like but on another level, uh, I kind of reformulated that by the lack of something means that it's cosmic, because a human, if I have something that's some human thing, that is by its nature limiting. And so the fact that I don't have this means that in my mind, my idea that I don't have intuition is sort of a more cosmic sense that human, in sort of I'm thinking of like Chinese art where humans small, mountains big, humans very small, universe beyond our comprehension.
Right.
Who is it to me to think that I understand intuitively what's going on with anything? And instead, the relationship is one of it's respect and awe and and honoring. This ani word just sounds perfect to me. It's like, dude, this is above your pay grade. This is what they call, the theology where it's like beyond your comprehension. So don't even try, even if you're trying to limit it, that's just going the wrong direction. So but I want to like compare that to what you were talking about. That to me, like we're opening the space that I'm not this, I'm not that. By opening the space to the fact that we don't have and it's not ours is a way being able to hold more information because we're not self-limiting to sort of on this or that, but I'm sort of rambling on here, but I think you kind of get intuitively maybe what I mean. I want to compare this to like being able to hold more information like these crystals can in quantum computing.
Yeah, because it's not our information. The information simply flows through us,
Right.
rather than us being hyper focused on the information that we as people store. And that's in part why I'm so excited to at some point to return to Chile and Bolivia to meet a fully fledged real life Yatiri, because I'm sure that they're experts at this. If they've lived in Ani for their whole life, they've given offerings to the mountain to their whole life, I'm sure they're just more in tuned to let the internal state of the mountain flow through them to share this information rather than extract it from the mountain. And I think there's probably a lot of beautiful things that we can learn through that.
Perfect. I like what you said is perfect. That's great. I think we need to start the podcast with that. In 50 minutes, we're going to start that and have that be the first quote. So
yes. Wow. Yeah.
I need to write that down.
Yes. I'm curious, is my audio coming through okay? I know my little wiggles aren't as sharp as yours.
No. It's because there's probably more noise coming from me and you're like more chill.
maybe I don't know. I think it's picking up my mic, but I maybe should have done headphones. But I hope this turns out okay.
Yeah, no, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. I can hear you fine. So they can. If not, I'll
boost.
I'll boost.
Yeah, you know how to do these things. You've been at this for a while.
Yeah, well, I know just enough to be dangerous about most things. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes.
All right. Well, what's anything else for the good of the order? What else?
I think that was a really good interview. I think that touched on a lot of the things I was thinking about, and I particularly appreciate you because I think you understand the atomistic angle to all of this as well.
Or don't.
Yeah, or at least we try, right? It's
and that's the thing. We you're not going to connect with the tree unless you go up and make offerings to it and connect with it. I mean,
right.
how else are you going to do? That's like, how else are you going to do it? I mean, and some people think you're weird, and I don't tell my daughters what I'm doing, but literally, I mean, I started doing that, and I carry around a little water bottle. I go to the forest and I fill myself. I draw a little circle with the water because the water is making an offering, because this is like coming back, and it's like I'm coming back and I'm going into the ground, and yeah, I mean, I'm still in my head, 99% of the time, but I can get glimpses maybe, and it's like a start. And yeah, and I love crystals. I think they're soothing. I hold them in my hand and I try to go into them and connect with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I have a funny story about crystals I think you'd appreciate. I want
Okay.
to tell this to more physicists. So you've seen one of these babes before, right? The selenite ones?
Yeah, the selenite wand. Sure.
Yeah, so I like them because they're a macroscopic crystal, and it's so hard to connect animism to anything with physicists because they shut down immediately with the woo-woo alerts.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, like you're not. I was worried that I was getting too woo woo, and you wanted to keep this more physics oriented. Is that you don't care about? Because I can edit some parts. You're okay with that?
I'm happy with everything we said because,
Okay.
I'm balancing a very difficult line here. Like, on the one hand, I'm getting physicists excited from even just a Western perspective. I think things with like Anna Maria Baron's crystal ball, they're
Yeah.
starting to nod their heads a bit like, oh, we can do a real experiment. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, also probably something weird and mystical is just going to happen if I do this in practice. So it's difficult to hold both, but like I said, I think I'm learning how to do that more effectively, and I want to stay true to myself. So I was really happy with how this ended up.
Okay. Good. Well, then I won't mess with it then. So,
Yeah,
well, tell me about the selenite wand you've got in your hand.
right. So hippies, from an energetic perspective, will tell you that selenite's grounding, right? Can get
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not.
uh,
I think it's more like. I mean, I like for grounding. I like shungite and tourmaline and what's that? Hematite.
hematite grounding. I've never heard this.
Yeah, well, this is just it's an N of one. It's me. I mean, that's how like because they're just like really yeah. Well, anyway, so selenite. I use like selenite to like it'll like move energies away, or kind of like cleansing. But anyway, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I agree. Cleansing because it takes like I think from your chakras. If I've like too much swirling in my heart, just like this, it feels like it like draws it out, right? Or it
Yeah,
soothes.
yeah,
And so it's
totally.
like I think as a physicist how this could relate to because just touching macroscopic crystals as a physicist, they all feel different, and there's very Western physical properties we can ascribe to these things that are well characterized as to why crystals feel different when you touch them. Like selenite feels very different from quartz, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, I wish that I could at least get condensed matter physicists to touch more crystals, to interact with them, because, like, they're even scared to do that because that's too woo woo. But then I'm got guys, heat capacity, phonons, things we've talked about in our physics classes. You can measure, in addition to measuring them in your lab equipment, you can feel them with your hands. That's been a big battle, but one of the crazier experiences I had with selenite in particular is I just had a lot of anger and excess energy one night, thinking admittedly about my time at Stanford, and like my blood was boiling so much, my heart was pounding. I squeezed so hard onto the selenite wand, all of a sudden I could feel my heartbeat transfer through the selenite to my other hand. So it's like the selenite was beating with my heart in that moment. Then I was like, wow, I think this crystal is very much a participant in my conscious experience in this moment.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
it's like, where's the boundary in that case? I could feel the crystal beating with my heart, and it's like, is the experience really confined at the boundary of my hands anymore? And it was just like, well, that was just something miraculous, and I could even, write down equations and do experiments as a Western physicist to describe what's happening. I guess the phonons propagating through the crystal wand when I hold it like that, and there's vibrations, but it's even with how scientifically grounded that one is, I still think it's going to be a hard one to ever communicate to Western physicists. But I'll try.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
All right. Well, have a good weekend, and let me keep me abreast of the next time you go down there, or you go to Bisbee or any place fun. Let me know.
yeah, and let's stay in touch. And I think this went really well, and I'm really, really happy that you got to do this with you. I think this was a great interview.